This is Apotheosis, the official podcast of the Production Designers Collective. I'm your host, Alexander Whittenberg. Thanks for tuning in to the first episode of our sub-series, Apotheosis from the Archives. Today, you'll hear excerpts from my conversation in August 2020 with the late Ralph Eggleston, whose credits include Toy Story, Finding Nemo, WALL-E, and Inside Out. This conversation was part of a series of live web interviews called the Creative Quarantine Sessions. In it, you'll hear Ralph speak about what makes designing for animation different from designing for live action, the color and light of a film set almost entirely underwater, and why it is so important to start with the character and work your way out when designing a film. Unfortunately, we lost Ralph in 2022, but we'll always remember the profound impact he made on so many through his rich involvement with the Production Designers Collective. Please note that this interview was recorded remotely, so bear that in mind when you hear the audio. And now, here are some moments from my conversation with the great Ralph Eggleston.
So let's jump in the Wayback Machine and go to your 10th birthday. There was a double feature that was a rather prominent moment for you.
Yeah, my sister took me to a birthday movie. It was a double feature. It was a movie. The first movie was probably not Helen Hayes or Helen Hayes, the high point in her career. It was one of her dinosaurs is missing. It's one of the Disney movies. But the second one was Cinderella, and that floored me. I had seen Alice in Wonderland probably in the second grade at some class function, but it didn't have the same impact that Cinderella did. And I saw Cinderella, and it had everything. It had magic and suspense and terror and sadness and just every emotion in the book crammed into one movie. And it was more real than real. And I left that movie the next day waking up saying, I want to do that for a living. I don't know what that is, but I want to do it. And I learned how to, I knew how to use the library. My sister's best friend, a wonderful woman, Sandy Bohannon, was an assistant at the library, and now she runs the library, or she did. I don't know if she still does. And she helped me figure out how to find all the books on animation in the library there. And this is in the middle of nowhere, Louisiana. And then I learned how to get books from other libraries, and then I learned how to use periodicals. And if anyone ever wondered, and there was a very funny moment. We had a thing at Pixar years ago now. It was for the archivist David Smith's retirement celebration. One aspect of it is we had a Disney bowl, kind of like the college bowls you have.
Yeah.
We had different teams. We had producers, animators, directors, theme park. I was part of the theme park group because they needed somebody, and I'm kind of a Disney nerd. And we all had our own Disney nerddoms. You know, there's Disneyland people, there's Epcot people, there's film animation people there. And so I'm a little bit of a lot of those things. Probably my specialty being animation and the studio in general and people, and in particular the really bad Disney movies from the early 70s to the early 80s. And you'll find out why in a moment. So I learned how to use the periodicals and then skip ahead to this Disney Bowl. And there was a series of questions. I don't know if you know what the college bowls are. You have like 3 or 4 people, and first person hits a button and you get to answer a few more questions.
Mm-hmm.
There was a series of questions about the movie Pete's Dragon, not the remake, but the original. And in my brain, as I hit the button, I knew, okay, I'm going to embarrass myself, and I'll be embarrassed for the rest of my life, but we could win. So I kept hitting the buttons, and I kept getting out the answer. They very obscure questions about Pete's Dragon, the movie Pete's Dragon, which I knew every answer to,
Mm-hmm.
As I was giving every answer, the crowds, which at Pixar, it was such a popular event, they actually streamed it to another theater on the property. The crowds were getting louder and louder and louder as I answered these dopey questions for this dopey movie. they stopped the show and they said, "Why do you know the answers to these questions? Why?" I mean, really. And look, I was 10 years old. My sister took me to see Cinderella, and I learned how to do animation. That was 1975. I was 10. And so when I learned how to use the periodicals, what Disney was promoting were Mickey's Christmas Carol, Fox and the Hound, Small One, and Pete's Dragon. And so it's like every article that would come out, I would read. I'm like, what is this? How are they doing it? And so I knew everything about that movie. When it came out, I was sorely disappointed as a movie, but I knew everything about it. So
You got the deep cuts on all these.
I cheered that I actually had a reason. Everybody understood, and was I was appreciative that I only had to be embarrassed for a few weeks.
At some point in this period, before you went off to Cal Arts, you wrote a letter to Glenn Keane. Right?
Yeah, when I was learning, I'd gotten the books, Preston Blair books, on couldn't figure out timing charts exactly, but I figured out how to put a drawing between each one of the drawings. Animation to me at the time was not about drawing. It was about telling stories and moving things around. Of course, I've learned since that you really got to know how to draw if you want to be a really good animator. I kind of figured that out, and I was playing around with clay animation, and I got this magazine, and there was a little story on Bill Keane, who draws Family Circus, the comic.
Yeah.
And then there was a sub-story, a little sub-story to it too, about his son Glenn, who had just started at Disney and was working as a Disney animator, and was working on Mickey's Christmas Carol, and so I said, "Oh, I'll write him a letter." So I wrote him a letter, and he wrote me back, and he told me what he was doing, and that if I was ever in LA, I should visit him, and that he went to a place called Cal Arts. He went to a program at Cal Arts when they didn't have a character animation program. They had a film program that had an animation section, but it was mostly experimental animation run by Jules Engel. But he did character animation, and he learned about that there. And then the next year is when they started the character animation program, and that's when Brad Bird and John Musker and John, they all kind of went there that first official year of that. So I learned about Cal Arts, and I made a little student film, little short film I have here, and it got me into Cal Arts, and I got scholarship money, and got to meet Glenn Keane, and started my career in animation.
What was your first gig outside of Cal Arts?
Boy, my first gig outside of Cal Arts. Well, I did movie titles while I was at Cal Arts for a really bad movie written and directed by Robert Forster, the late Robert Forster, who was a super cool, nice guy, the actor. And it was only $2,000, but that was a lot of money to me, and I was able to get a car, which you need if you live in Los Angeles. So my first job really was working for Brad Bird on an episode of Amazing Stories called Family Dog. It was the only animated episode of that series. It was terrific. It was basically 3 short films, kind of made it a half-hour special. And lots of wonderful people worked on it. Chris Buck directed the animation. He directed Frozen and Tarzan, and lots of folks worked on it. Tim Burton boarded on it. So it was a lot of fun. I was absolute low man on the totem pole. Tony Fucilli animated on Sue Croyer, Dan Jew. An insane bunch of talent in this small place next to Skid Row. Actually, it was between Skid Row and a porn studio in downtown LA. And, it was with no air conditioning during the summer, but we never had more fun. And it was only a 3-month gig for me, but I paid my rent and helped me get brakes for my car, which I didn't have.
That's great. Now, you've grouped that film in with Brave Little Toaster and The Little Mermaid as sort of seminal films for that period in the world of animation. Could you speak to why that is?
Well, I'll tell you, I've never been that big of a fan of the movie Roger Rabbit. I appreciate the effort. I just don't think it's a very good movie. I like some of the animation, in particular the Dave Stafford work, and there's bits and pieces of the animation I like, but for the most part, I felt it overly frantic as a movie, but I was glad it was successful enough, and it got a lot of good publicity. But in the ensuing years, I felt like it's been given maybe too much credit for the renaissance of animation that had already started and was really going on. And I didn't even think it was the culmination of what the animation community was capable of doing. But I believe that the three or four films were The Family Dog and Brave Little Toaster, directed by Jerry Rees, and The Little Mermaid, of course. The first, that to me, that was really the big one. It was the first film that captured what I feel like Walt would have really loved, and that was a family film that genuinely adults can enjoy as much as children. Leaving the kids at home, they would go on their own and see the movie and enjoy it. And I felt like that's what you got out of Brave Little Toaster and The Family Dog as well. They weren't films aimed at a particular and limiting audience, say like a Bakshi film, or not that those are bad. I'm not saying that. I just think that maybe the most difficult kind of thing to do is to really just make a good movie. I mean, people don't think of Hitchcock films and say, well, that was an R-rated movie. Maybe except for Psycho. They just think of a Hitchcock film as a really great film. In reality, most of them are G or PG rated. If you're really thinking of it that way, 2001 and even the original Planet of the Apes were rated G. So, and Jaws was rated PG until it went on video, and then they changed it to PG-13. So, it's more like a fun experience for everybody. And those were the films I thought that really broke the mold. And again, Roger Rabbit was there too, but I didn't find it as entertaining as the other three, as a film unto itself.
Right. Perhaps a bit more emphasis on the gimmick than the story.
Yeah, and the gimmicks were really well done.
After that, you were doing some kind of commercial work in China and some other places, right?
Well, a lot of this left Family Dog, and there was no work going on in LA really at the time, not a lot. The Brave Little Toaster had wrapped up, Family Dog had wrapped up, and there wasn't a lot going on. So a lot of us ended up on this film called The Chipmunk Adventure. Not a very good film, but it was a fun place to work. We really did. We talked about it still. It was a very unique experience, to say the very least. Although he wasn't getting credited as the director, Glenn Keane was basically directing the film. I think maybe the second time he had left Disney at that point, because there was nothing there challenging him, I don't think. So, and he was doing the best he could with what he had, and he certainly was training a lot of people, and everybody in LA worked on that film. People that eventually became the top directors and animators at Disney all worked on that film. Again, I was low man on the totem pole. It was my second job, and so I was just glad to have money to eat. But I learned a lot, and there was a lot of wonderful people, and it was an awful film, just terrible. But again, we had a lot of, and at a certain point, my student loans that I had started coming due, and I'd gotten word from a friend, Joe Rampt, the late Joe Rampt, that they were needing help overseas, where they made Brave Little Toaster at this company called Cuckoo's Nest in Taipei. And so I went over there and over into China to supervise a TV show called DuckTales. There was no glory. There was nothing particularly fun about it. It was a meat potatoes job, and I learned a lot, and I met a lot of wonderful people, and a whole new culture. Never lived in another country. I was there for 6 months to the day. That's when a bunch of other tax stuff kicks in, so I needed to kind of get my tail back. And so by the time I got back to the U.S., I had saved enough money to have a little money and also pay off all my student loans, which I did promptly. So I kind of looked at it as lifting the needle on my career for 6 months to be able to take care of that. So
awesome. Put the burden behind you, and then you can focus on the art, right?
Yeah, although there was still no work going on in LA at the time. And so I think I had gotten a call at that point to work on Roger Rabbit. But I was more intrigued by getting a call from my friend Doug Frankel to go work in Muncie, Indiana, for a guy named Jim Davis, who runs the comic strip Garfield. We were doing 15 minutes of an hour-long television special that eventually, I guess, won an Emmy. I didn't know that until recently. And we were doing the 3 non-Garfield parts of this, and we the only thing we didn't have control over was the soundtrack. We designed, boarded, animated, inked, and painted, and shot all of the stuff ourselves, or supervised that, I should say, or did it ourselves.
Wow,
So
amazing.
yeah, it was crazy, and it was one of these things that it's not the greatest thing since sliced milk or anything, but we learned a lot, and we sure had a lot of fun. I had gotten Andrew Stanton to animate a couple of scenes on National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, and because he was working on Mighty Mouse at the time, and I think he might have just enjoyed animating again for a change. Then he called me and he goes, "Well, we've got this project up north, and I'd love to meet with you. Love John Lasser to meet with you." And so there was a little place called Bombay Bicycle Club on First and Angelino, across from the Holiday Inn Burbank Media Center. The building's still there. I don't know what it is now, probably a Black Angus or something like that. And I went over and brought my portfolio, and John hired me on the spot and then asked me if I could drive him to the airport. So, I drove to the airport, and I thought it would be like 6 months or something, where it transition and I just moved into an apartment and signed a year lease, and no, they said, "No, we want you up next week." So off and running, there I was working on the first computer animated film called Toy Story. I knew nothing about computers or anything like that. I knew Andrew, Pete Doctor, and Jeff Pigeon, and I knew Joe Ranth a little, but I didn't know John, and I didn't know anyone else at the studio at the time. Yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah. So you were all embarking into this sort of brave new world of CGI computer animation together. With a feature length film, this was sort of a first, right? To have a fully computer animated feature.
Yeah, it was the first fully digital art department for any film, live action or animated, and also the first fully animated feature film. I think people had tried before, but I don't think their hearts were in the right place. What I mean by that is the story wasn't in the right place. Yeah.
And story. Well, there's a quote you shared with me last week.
We'll say that.
We'll save it. Okay. So you were credited as art director, but you really took on the responsibility of a production designer. When I had sort of perhaps naively assumed that it was a very different job being a production designer of an animated film than a live action film, when in fact you told me it's really not, but perhaps just the scope of work is different.
It's very there. Well, the job of the production designer and is pretty much the same. The details of an art director's job can be somewhat different in that we can't just find a place to shoot. I can't say, let's go shoot down. I found a barn on the corner of First and Fifth Streets or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
Let's go and dress that up and make it look like something that we can shoot in. No, we, at the time in particular, we had to design everything from scratch and build everything from scratch and plan all the textures from scratch. And it was akin to, we had a wonderful, talented group of scientists that was designing and building the hardware and software as we were writing and designing the film. It's kind of like in Wallace and Gromit when he's laying the train tracks in front of him to make the movie. The one thing we had was John Lasseter had done this before, and he knew how to look at a rough drawing, a finished painting, a photo reference, and his imagination, and see how it could all come together. So we kind of had to trust in that, As far as art directing and the differences between art directing, production designing, a live action film and anime, no, there isn't a lot of difference. You have to design a film. What is this film about? And why a particular style? And why are you choosing this wallpaper? And, what is the scale of the film? In reality, it was probably a lot more akin to studio filmmaking in the 30s and 40s, where there wasn't a lot of location photography. You really did design and build everything inside a soundstage, and our soundstage was a virtual soundstage in the computer. So
not to jump too far ahead, but that reminds me of a story you shared about Richard Silbert, the production designer, visiting Pixar and kind of making that connection to the old studio system, right?
Yeah, we were. I was lucky to get Richard Silver to come and give us a talk, and stayed with us all day, and he talked to us about film and production design, and it was really wonderful and enlightening. His mentor was William Cameron Menzies, who is the first person credited with the title of production designer. It was really something else. He said, "You guys get to draw everything," and we were like, "Get to, we have to. Nothing exists, you know. We have to draw everything and choose every color and every texture, and it's yeah, that's the way it was. It's a lot better now. Focusing on the design was difficult enough for a film. Focusing on the design and then having to break every little aspect of it down. No one ever, I certainly never expected I'd have to learn how to do to the degree we had to on some of the early Pixar films, or first 5 or 8 films. And but we did have to, like as wonderful and as talented and as smart as a lot of our brilliant engineers were, a lot of them didn't have visual skills and didn't see the picture in terms of how it coordinated with the story and the element of time, and that is screen time when you're telling a story. It's not that they couldn't do it, it's that they hadn't done it, and it was something that I'd lived and breathed for, at least at that point, up to 10 years of my career. And others like Joe and John, and certainly Pete and Andrew and I, that's what we do, is we're filmmakers.
Filmmakers first.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did the technology scare you when you started on Toy Story?
It did, but then I learned how to let go of it. It's
Mhm.
it's just a tool. There are definitely days where I wish I had broken down and learned how to use all of those tools like Maya and this and that. And I know how to use like SketchUp and a couple of little things, certainly Photoshop now. But I'm kind of glad I didn't either, because I knew that there were people that were going to be far better at that than I was. But that if I stayed focused on the design of a film and what it meant to the story, because a production designer is a visual architect of the film, and I think that's a big enough job, you
Yeah,
know. so
indeed.
so yeah, I wanted to stay focused on that.
You were first credited as production designer at Pixar on Finding Nemo.
Yeah, and I had worked on Monsters Inc. for 10 months, and then started working on For the Birds. Also during that period, I didn't know I wanted the production design. I didn't even really know what that was, or really what art direction was, really, not really. So I started reading up on it and watching more films and understanding what the big picture themes were. And again, Richard Silbert coming up, and getting to meet with him and learn from him was a big eye opener. I mean, his designs for Chinatown in particular, that's what he primarily talked about when he was talking to us that day. But he was talking about the big picture conceits of a film. For example, Chinatown's about not water, and so there's no clouds in any shot in the movie. Everywhere Jake walks is uphill, as the water's running up against him downhill. Anyone who has green has money. They could water their lawns, and everywhere he goes, he is surrounded by water, but it's salt water, and you can't drink it. And even all the windows are frosted glass, so it looks like dirty water. And the doors are painted with high gloss paint, so that it looks wet, but you can't drink it. And all the buildings are painted white to reflect the heat of Southern California. And all of these ideas, these big picture conceits, were laid out in the design of the film. In some cases, long before the director came on the show, so it just gives you something to think about and something to chew on when you're starting to think about planning a film. So I attempted some of that on Finding Nemo.
A question I had that you might be able to sort of answer as we go is talking about the ocean, which is a very familiar place for us. We've all gone snorkeling, some of us scuba diving. It exists in the world. So, how do you use color and light to your advantage to create a suspension of disbelief that helps tell the story in a world that is so familiar?
It's not that familiar, believe it or not. It's more familiar. Most 99.9.5% of the people that think when they think of the ocean, they think of a documentary of the ocean.
Hmm.
Uh, a lot of people think, oh, the closer coral is to the surface of the water, the more colorful it is. That's exactly the opposite. It's actually much more colorful the darker and less sunlight it has, because it only has to focus on catching um, passing food, and the surge and swell versus the coral that gets closer to the light, which really wants to spread out and capture the sunlight more. So anyway, those interesting things like that you learn. And every one of the films I've gotten to work on is a 4-year graduate course in this subject matter. But but the question was what again specifically?
How did you use color and light to tell the story or take us on the journey of Marlin?
The first thing is what I was doing with kind of a shape script, and basically the story was pretty well set. This, I'll go to the thing we talked about briefly earlier. People, even at Pixar, they say story is king, story is king, story is king. No, it's not. Story is not king. Storytelling is king. Stories are a dime a dozen. Good stories are harder to find, but telling that story well, that's where the real hard work is. And it's music, dialogue, cinematography, lighting, design, animation, acting. All of the above are choices that are made and choices that are withheld, decisions withheld to kind of keep the audience in suspense and make you wonder what's going to happen next. So really, storytelling is king. Father is afraid, and so he lives underneath the coral. It keeps him down. And then Nemo gets him to travel out a little further, and then he ends up at the edge of the reef. And then Father has to travel to the top of the ocean to see his son taken away. And then he has to sink all the way to the bottom of the ocean and then traverse the ocean to the deepest, darkest places to find his son. And then they get trapped by the whale, shot up by the whale, and then say goodbye. Then Father and Nemo meet again, and then Nemo takes off at the end of the movie. The other thing was I had a concern early on from one of our executive producers, Tom Schumacher at Disney. We had really hardly started working on the film, but he made a very interesting and valid point, that he was concerned that because it was set underwater that the film would come across dark all the time. And that dark films that are like that all the time can wear on the audience's emotions a bit. And I'm like, well, I don't think I had ever intended for everything in the film to be dark, but I didn't know because I hadn't really started working on it yet. But it was a good thing to think about as I dove into the film production. And so one thing I thought about was, okay, well, what's the film about? It's about a father losing his son and having to traverse the ocean to find his son. He's afraid of now. He's afraid of the future because of something that happened in the past. And so he lives in terror every moment. And the only thing he's got to trust is someone he meets named Dory, who can't remember the present or future or past, really. So it's the idea that he has to find his son by learning to let go and trust his instincts. And so I decided I wanted to represent that by the color and water density of the film. You can see the colorful reef and you can see pretty far. And then as Nemo gets taken away, it gets darker and the water density becomes greater and greater and greater. And then we wanted some variety. We had variety with the jellyfish and the turtles, and then finally the whale until the end of the film when it is almost becomes black and white until they finally reach home again, and it's even more colorful than it was at the beginning. We kind of amped up the color and the clarity of the water at the end of the film quite a bit. So that was one of the visual goals that I kind of utilized from my little chats with Richard Silbert to kind of underscore the theme of the film with the visuals. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. And once these things are kind of laid down and agreed upon and everybody gets them, including the director, it actually allows for a lot more collaboration during the process because everybody understands what the intention is, because the storytelling is changing under our feet constantly. So
when you have so many individuals working, putting their own heart and soul into a project, how do you unify them with the story you're trying to tell?
Well, the story you're trying to tell. It's really it. Usually, I'm on the film early enough. I'm usually one of the very first people on the film to try and kind of get rid of a lot of crap and shake the trees and see what's not working as fast as possible. Try and crawl into the director's head and the story's head and figure out what are we trying to say. What is this film about? Not what's the plot and what are the sets, and that counts. But what is this film about? Finding Nemo wasn't about a coral reef and an open ocean. It was about a father who lost his son and had to traverse the ocean to find him and trust
Right.
things, And how do you visually then represent that? Once you kind of have those basics down, I end up bringing on usually 3 to 4 art directors, one for characters, one for environments, one for textures and shading, and then depending on the level of graphics, the amount of graphics, we would now have a graphics art director. A film like Wall-E or Incredibles 2 would have a graphics art director because there just are so many.
Right.
Versus a film like Finding Nemo and maybe The Good Dinosaur that might have less graphics. So we would have graphics artists, but not graphics art directors. Then we start breaking the film down. You've got to break it down by budget and by schedule and what's needed first. A lot of times they want to go with these big scenes that have very little animation. The problem is that they are very complicated to do versus a scene which might be less complicated to design and build, but has lots and lots of animation.
Mm.
And I tend to go with those first because it buys us time to kind of design and build those larger sets that we're going to need later.
Right.
Those large sets tend to have, believe it or not, less screen time in general. So kind of gotta be careful with your dollars.
A huge part of your job is budgeting time and resources over the course of
Oh yeah,
the several years.
absolutely, absolutely. And I don't have many examples, but I have a few examples of being able to go in and have some big budget schedule wins with the producers, make them like me a little bit more. One of them I remember specifically. I was the only one who went to Australia to do research on Finding Nemo. And I had gone to Sydney. I wanted to get the lay of the land of Sydney. I could look at a map, and I'd been to Australia before myself. But to kind of figure out what is Sydney like really, and where do we want to place things, and just kind of get the lay of the land. When I got back, they had boarded a sequence where the seagulls are chasing, the seagulls are chasing the pelicans. In the final film, it's something else. But originally, they were flying through downtown Sydney, Australia. We could have done that, but it would have meant building cars and trees for that, and buildings, and very expensive. Also, if you're in Sydney, if the dentist office was in downtown Sydney, you would never know really you were in downtown Sydney, because when you're in the middle of something, it's kind of like being in the middle of the forest. Which forest is it? You don't know. It's a forest. So I suggested, why don't we put it in Balmoral, which is across the bay. It has a view of the picture postcard view of Sydney Harbor, the bridge, the Needle, and the city, and the Opera House. And I said that way, every time we cut to the dentist office, we know where we are, Sydney, Australia. And also down the hill from there, we have a little marina, and that's where the seagulls could chase the pelicans. And that way, the city itself could end up just being a matte painting in the background, and that could be done in a couple of days versus months of building the city. And
Right.
The director liked it honestly because of the clarity. I don't think he cared about the financial aspect, but the producers were very happy from the financial point of view.
I imagine so.
In Australia, so I get one of those kinds of things on every movie.
I'd like to jump to another project. One of my personal favorites is a film called Wall-E. I rewatched Charlie Chaplin's The Circus the other night, and I was so struck by how similar in their sensibilities, Wally and Chaplin or any of these silent film stars are. You brought such life out of this rusty metal robot.
Yeah, it was really believe it or not, once we had a design that everyone bought off onto with the character, especially the animators, it wasn't as hard as we thought it was going to be. Mainly because, you know, it became about staging the shots appropriately and then letting the audience in on how the character was feeling. So the shots tended to be a little bit longer so the audience can kind of ruminate on and imagine what is that character thinking, and I wonder what that character's feeling. And we had act one of our film, the first 20 something minutes is also monochrome. And how were we going to give some visual variety to the audience so that we could kind of carry them along to where we wanted them to be? One of the key things, it was almost a black and white film, monochrome actually, sandy colored, for 2/3 of Act One. And then when Eve arrives, we start introducing more and more color. And then when she shuts down, it goes back to square one. And then only when we get to Act Two are we introducing a lot more color. So one of the first things I like to do, and it varies on every film, is put words together and get a thesaurus out. And the words just kind of give me an idea of what I'm going to need to visualize. So, look, Wally's effusive, he's old school, straightforward, guileless, resourceful, practical, mechanical, hard, lonely, square, messy. And then Eve is efficient, reserved, futuristic, round, clean, programmed, deadpan, fast. Earth is barren, hot, monochrome, depleted, desert, bleached. And then Axiom is organized, overbearing, bureaucratic, dismissive, obfuscates, branded, controlling, automated, those kinds of things. So with Act One, color scripts are a shorthand way to look at the entire film and how the color, the lighting, and the values of the story we're telling flow. And I started this on, there's always been versions of this. Color keys is what they're usually called in animation. But in terms of flowing them on strips from one to the next, it's something that I like doing because it felt more stream of consciousness. I didn't know we didn't have a story for Act 2 and 3 really. It kept changing. It changed dramatically several times. And so while I was grateful to have the time to work on making Act 1 look as good as we could, we had to get Act 2 up and running. One thing I didn't know, and it's hard for me to design a set without thinking about the color and the lighting up front. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where the story was going, and I didn't know who the antagonist was to Wally and Eve. And it finally dawned on me that it was, by and large, it was the company. And by and large built the spaceship. They built Wally and they built Eve. Wally had a heart and Eve nurtures one, but by and large really was just a major corporation. And so I came up with this idea of breaking out every section of the ship and lighting it the way the by and large would light it. In other words, it's not about how Wally was about, Act 1 was about romantic lighting. It was about underlining the character's emotions through the lighting and how we wanted him to feel and how we wanted the audience to feel. Act 2 and 3 is all about how by and large wants you to feel, where you are on the ship. And they will have designed the lighting. It's kind of like going to a mall or like Disneyland. It's about the experience of this space. And so we had areas like the trash compactor airlock area were kind of gray and a little cool. And then we had the repair ward access. We wanted it to be kind of off-white and very bright. Economy class, we wanted it to be very basic. Everything's the same. Even the signs were the same. And a lot of the colors were just kind of gray and white. And then you get to coach class is really the fun area. It's like the Vegas Disneyland area where it's all about, can we get you to spend more money? And can we lead you around the corner? So it's all about lots more color and lots more activity and a lot more signage.
Yeah, Times Square.
Yeah, Times Square. Then we get to first class, and first class is always about paying a lot more. You get a lot more, but there's less in the way. It's less obtrusive. It's more calming. It was much more like a spa. And then we had the bridge and the captain's apartment. We always wanted the bridge to be kind of a dark room, dark blue, but his apartment underneath, directly underneath, has warm colors to it, and it has wood, reminding us of Earth a little bit, wood and carpet and things like that might just in a very subtle way remind us of Earth. And that's kind of how we needed to think of it. And there was a lot of reasons we needed to do that. Number one was we were out of time and we didn't know what to do because the story was changing so dramatically up until the very last minute. Two was it needed to make some sort of sense. I always felt guilty for doing it this way. We had a great DP on the show, Danielle Feinberg. She was able to light so much of the Axiom as though it were a real place instead of a place where we were going to need to use lighting to emotionally support a moment in the film. We would eventually do that as well, but we were able to get very, very far, very fast with this plan, which I felt very guilty about because I felt like I had cheated. But it turned out I was right. Axiom was the antagonist. I mean, by and large, was the antagonist, and it ended up working out for exactly what it needed to do. It was the right answer for the right time, even though it was a scary situation. So
Yeah, well, a cautionary tale that seems to be coming closer to the truth every day.
oh yeah.
I wanted to ask you really quick about the story department and the art department. I know you sort of think of them as two pieces of the same puzzle, right? They're sort of partners in so many ways.
We are the same department, basically. That you can't tell the story without knowing what the sets are going to be, not just look like, but what they're going to be and how they're going to be needed to be used, and vice versa. We can't design something without knowing what the story needs are, and so we're in constant check with them on everything we do. You know, prevising and getting things up and running. And I try and go to every story meeting I can, just so a lot of it has less to do with actually knowing what's going on with the story, although there is that. It's about reading between the lines. It's about hearing not what's working now, but how they're trying to get it to work. So I can go back to my office and maybe come up with a set that solves their problem.
I want to ask you about a slightly more kind of tactile piece of the process, which is research. I know there's a huge emphasis on research at Pixar, and I know it's really a necessary piece of the puzzle. I know that you looked at some sea lions for Wally when you're trying to understand like the blubber of the humans in this world, and I know that for the next film I'd like to talk about a bit, Inside Out, you went to an egg sorting plant to kind of understand the mechanics of how memories might be sorted. I know this is a really daunting film, Inside Out, so could you kind of take us on that journey with you a little bit?
Inside Out's always a hard film to talk about because it was that hard to do. We had to really rely on our instinct and emotion in all of our research. Yeah, we went to a Jelly Belly factory too. Jelly Bellies and how they sorted them. And there was a bigger part of the film showing how things were sorted. For a long time, there was a huge sequence set in a sorting station. And every film has a sequence or two like that where we do a lot of research on something that just goes away, but then some of that informs things that happen later. So, but yeah, Inside Out was a very difficult film to do because, well, we could do research on certain aspects of it, but really, when you boil it down, when you're boiling it down to it, it's like, what does an 11-year-old girl's mind look like? How does it operate? What does it mean? And from a design point of view, in terms of designing the meat and potatoes of designing a film, we had the real world as well as the mind world. When something changed in the mind world, something had to change in the real world. And when something changed in the real world, something changed in the mind world. So the idea of being able to do a color script was something I attempted numerous times, but I wasn't able to do because the story, again, was in such flux for so long. And so I ended up doing more color keys and being able to move them around and adjust the lighting as needed as we moved along.
Mm.
It was a really hard film. It's still, we talked last week in prep for this meeting, and I admit it, and I'm so proud of the film and proud of all the, people like it, and it was successful, and it seemed to get good reviews, and so but it's a film that I'm still awfully close to. When I talk about it, I just remember a lot of the hard days of really having to trust our gut, and it's a lot, it's a lot of time, and it's a lot of money, and it's a lot of people working on these things, having to trust your gut too, and they're having to trust their gut. But with the film changing so often, the story and the details changing so often, in order to get to what it needed to be, we had to do what the film did, which was rely on our emotions. I mean, it sounds corny, but it was really true. It's a hard film to talk about. My version of what might go on in an 11-year-old girl's mind or mine is not necessarily what the director's is, or the story, or the little girl. You really have to trust the character. It's not what the director wants, it's what the character wants.
Right.
On that particular character, that's what character animation is. It's getting into that particular character's mind. And so, yeah, we could come up with all kinds of stuff, but until it felt right for that particular character at that particular time in the film and in the story, it was daunting. It was very daunting. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a sequence I love in the film, which is abstract thought. And I imagine it took a crazy amount of abstract thought just to kind of lay out the basics of what the human mind would look like on screen. I know you said that for the train of thought alone, you had maybe 500 to 800 ideas that came through before you landed on the final image, that was used in the picture.
Oh yeah, there was. I used to have the number stuck in my head, but it was somewhere around 800 train of thought designs and different permutations of it. And it was once a bigger. It was in the film a lot more earlier.
Yeah.
Earlier version of the film, and that's partially why. The idea of abstract thought was always in the film. Pete always has these one or two ideas going into his movies that are always stick. And that was always one that we didn't know how it was going to be in the movie or where it was going to be in the movie, but we knew it was going to be in the movie somehow. So, our character art director, and he's just a brilliant designer, Albert Lozano, kind of pulled a lot of that together. And Pete wanted it to go into these different stages. So Albert was able to break it down into the 2 or 3 different stages. And then it's always also one of these fun projects for some of our technical folks who really want to be involved in something that's different looking than the rest of the movie. So it's almost like a short film in the film that they get to work on and help solve a lot of problems. It's a lot of fun.
I had one more piece I want to bring up about Inside Out, and if you would indulge us just a bit with the color of the sky. You shared some references of that the other day, and I know that was a particular challenge. So if you could shed some light on what that was for you.
So one of the things that we had a hard time with, for some reason, it's one of the things that seems so simple, and in the film you don't even think about it. It's what does the sky color of the mind look like? And we couldn't figure it out. We thought for a while, well, it should be, if she's angry, maybe it should go red, and if she's sad, maybe it should go blue. It should change colors like a mood ring. And nothing was clicking. I got a call from the producer saying we had to have the answer by Friday at 6:00, by the end of the day Friday. And I said, okay, well, let me have that Thursday and Friday to figure it out. It was a Wednesday. And I didn't know what to do. And so I went back, and I had done a couple of new pastels or paintings. Nothing was clicking. So I went into the art room, and there were some of the earlier images that I had done, and even some of the later images I had done, showing various parts of the world.
Mm-hmm.
But they all had one thing in common. The sky colors were this neutral kind of color, this bluish, grayish color kind of thing. I don't know how to explain it. I'd love to say that I sat down and analyzed that. Well, it makes perfect sense because you've got so many, the memories are so many different colors and the characters so many different colors. It's nice to have a neutral thing for them to read against. Well, that's true, but that's not why it came about. It came about just, again, by pure instinct. And so I felt like that's the answer. So I ran down, got the producer and the director, Pete, I dragged him into the art room, and I said, I think I have the answer. And I said, look at all the paintings hanging up on the wall. These were all on the wall and more. There were more on the wall. And I said, this is the answer. And they go, what? And I said, they're all kind of the same range of color. And I said, I didn't choose that. That was what I instinctively painted when I painted these images. It was again, intuition working for me and working for my need to tell this story and what we were doing. And they said, I think you're right.
Yeah.
Well, we kind of said great, and I went home, and I was just I think I just went straight to sleep. I was exhausted from having to worry about it, and they needed it by the following Monday to start lighting some of the film. It's crazy. And there are points where you try and intellectualize what you're doing, and early in the film and during the film. And sometimes it can work and at least help you kick. If it doesn't give you the answer, it can kick you in a direction that might be useful. One thing I don't believe in, though, is designing a film from the outside in. You got to start from the character and work your way out. That's the only way it really works. There's a book. I'm not a big fan of this book called Visual Storytelling by Bruce Bloch. Nice guy. I'm sure it helps a lot of people, but I just don't think you can design a film from the outside in that way. I don't think it works. I think start from the character and work your way outwards. And it's a lot harder to do.
Yeah.
But it's always the best way.
What happens at Pixar when any filmmaker in the process gets too close to their work and they're sort of blinded by their own thoughts? Maybe they don't know how to move forward and solve a problem. Does the brain trust come to help in those situations?
It can. We're pretty. We have lots of people, lots of us check on each other. The director, certainly the producer, me as production designer might say something to the technical group might come to me and say something. So we're pretty good about it. I think the thing that so far I've seen at Pixar, and I do mean this, is that it's always focused on the story. And I think everybody really is just, if we're having problems, chances are if you go back to the story, a solution will come. It's rarely about what's right in front of you. It's about going back to the story and figuring out what are we trying to say here. And then let's pretend we haven't done 6 months of work on this, and just can we come up with something that can be done in an afternoon,
right?
With tools that we already have. It's great. I think so long as you can get back to the story, and now that is getting harder. I admit, because our schedules are getting shorter, and the storytelling process that Pixar has adopted is a constant change. And so finding where the current take of the story can be sometimes challenging as well. So what are we doing today?
Yeah. In terms of constant change at Pixar, there have been some great recent releases on Disney Plus, a couple short films, Kitbull and Out in particular, that utilize a really different sort of aesthetic language to tell the story. What are your thoughts on the future of aesthetics for Pixar in particular?
I'm working on some things like that right now, on the very idea of that. What is the difference between, and these are my definitions, a look and a style. Look to me being kind of a rendering quality or a non-photorealistic look, versus a style, which is pushing things that we already have further than we have before. Could be lighting, form, color, texture, cinematography, cutting, animation, style. It's an interesting issue. One of which we're very interested in dealing with. A lot of the different looks, that is the surface quality that I love, tend to be more successful in short films, where the filmmaker can kind of get their head around the whole thing and really plan every shot the way they want it to be. In our features, it's often we don't know what all the shots are going to need to be, so we kind of have to plan for the bigger picture scenario. It's not that we've ever set out to make something photorealistic. It turned out that's just something that kind of happens, and it's also it helps with a certain believability of the world. The one thing about computer animation, it's 1 foot in theater, 1 foot in hand-drawn animation, and 1 foot in live action. But what it has is it's this thing that live action has is it has physics, and if physics don't feel right in CG, it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel good. And so how do you define that? How do you weight those options? The visual, the cool look option versus the physics option. It's an interesting conversation. I don't know if I can go into great detail about it right now. I'm still ruminating and on it myself. The films, hand-drawn films afford you a lot more freedom because the audience goes in knowing it's a drawn film, and they believe what you tell them to believe. And CG, when you have a character that's this giant monster, and if it doesn't have the physics of a giant heavy monster, if it's floating and it just kind of puts its foot down very lightly, and there's not a point for that reason, it suddenly becomes the audience is questioning it, and they spend more time questioning it than just being invited into the world. I thought that in particular, the first half of the Spider-Verse movie was very successful at coming up with a new look and a new style. I thought that was a really, really good thing. One of the other things about looks that is kind of a rendering quality, say like an oil painting on glass or a watercolor look, is our films, feature films in particular, are character-driven films, and the audience, anything that's going to give the audience's ability to connect emotionally with the characters is going to be a problem. And we really need them to be able to focus on the characters and the characters acting. In any kind of painterly movement within the frame can sometimes get in the way of that, and it's a challenge. It's a huge challenge, and we're looking forward to expanding our palette for sure.
I know I myself have revisited a bunch of your projects over the past week or so, and it's always a treat. It's always there's always something new to find, and above all, the humanity shines through, and I think that's what sets Pixar Animation Studios and all the great storytellers there. It sets the work apart, really.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm really lucky. I'm really lucky to get to work with such great storytellers and be a part of teams.
So to wrap it up, I have the big question that I asked all of my guests, which is, what is your hope for the future of storytelling?
More stories, better stories, more character-driven stories.
Mm-hmm.
I love all kinds of films, but I'd love to see. I really love the idea of making general audience films that everyone can go see. I also like the idea that there can be audiences for films that are slightly more limited than that, and I don't want to call them adult films, but I love the idea that we could make a film, say Raiders of the Lost Ark in animation, something of that quality. I'll tell you, when I saw Black Swan, I saw it at its world premiere at Telluride Film Festival, sitting right next to the director, and it hit me in the head with like a bat, and I was like, okay, I am not now saying I want to make Black Swan in animation. I would love to make an animated film that hit me in the head as much as Black Swan did, whatever that is, Cinderella did it for me when I was 10 years old. So what is that now?
Right.
So Iron Giant did it for me. So and Up did it for me. Up is my favorite of the Pixar films,
It's amazing.
Yeah.
There's so many great stories out there, and I think there's some excitement in not knowing what is still to be created or discovered or dreamt up, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Ralph, I cannot thank you enough for the generosity of your time and stories, sharing them here with us today.
Oh, no, thank you for asking. I appreciate it.
That brings us to the end of our conversation today. I'd like to give a shout out to my co-producer, Gavin Mosier, and the composer of our original music, Nathan Avakian. As a reminder, if you enjoyed today's program, please consider taking a moment to rate the podcast and subscribe for upcoming episodes. Until next time, stay creative, and thanks for listening.